My wife Mary and I went on a photo tour in August of last year, and this is kind of a summary of mostly just pictures. And we thought in the middle of winter, what better place to go to than a nice sunny place with lots of bright colored birds. So that's the main purpose for brightening up everybody's winter. So why go to Ecuador? In addition, well, primarily we went for the birds. So why would you think Ecuador? Ecuador's land mass is 109 square kilometers as compared to the US of over 3,500 square kilometers. So, but within that space, it has more birds, more than twice as many bird species as the United States, including Alaska and Hawaii. So that's one of the reasons you go for that condensed experience in Ecuador. In addition to that, while you're out looking at birds, there's so many other things that you run into along the way. One of the things that's just phenomenal at the higher elevation is the vegetation. If you were a botanist, you could probably spend your entire trip on the higher elevations of the Andes looking at the power mill, which is the grasslands there. It looks like a little mix of tundra and other things. You'll see some bird pictures. I took of a picture of a bird just to get a picture of the grasses that it was sitting on. And then we'll talk about, you see a lot of moths, and you'll find out why you see a lot of moths on bird trips, but some of them are just gorgeous, like this moth here. And then the banana feeders draw some other wildlife as well. So that one, I think they colloquially, funnily called, what was it, the tree otter, but that's not its real name, but I have written in here somewhere in my notes that I can't read because the printing is too small, what it was. You remember the name? Tyra. Thank you, Mary. Just a gorgeous animal. Here's a picture. In red is where we went. Oh, the other thing I was going to cover on why Ecuador. It's so easy to get to. Here we're in either the same time zone, or depending on daylight saving times or not, we're either in the same time zone or just one off. So there's no jet lag, and it's an easy flight, fly into Miami, then down. It's as easy as going to the West Coast as far as flight time, and no time zone change, or very little. So that's the other. It's just easy to get to. And relatively known risks, if you think about traveling to a foreign country, very good State Department notifications. And if you go with a tour company, which I would highly recommend, they keep track of any cautionary things that would potentially cause your trip to have to be canceled. So we're glad that we went, in this case, to northern Ecuador versus southern, because at the time we went southern Ecuador, you probably would not have wanted to go on a trip to. So here's in red is kind of where we went. We were talking beforehand a little bit about the areas within Ecuador that make it for such good biodiversity. The Galapagos over here, 600 miles off coast. You have lots of things that are endemic to only the Galapagos Islands, and makes it a destination in and of itself. Then once you get into the coastal areas, it's got its own environments and habitats. You travel up the slopes of the Andes on the west side. It's got its own habitats, and it changes as the elevation changes. You get up to Quito in this area. This is actually between a couple of ridges, so the birds on this ridge are different than the birds on that ridge. And then you go down the other side, down towards the Amazon, and as you go down in elevations, the species are not all different, but there are different species and different habitats on that side of the mountain slope as well. And then you get down into the Amazon, and that's altogether different. And on this trip, we did not go down into the Amazon. Where we did go was we went about 200 miles from the westmost to the eastmost. So within that distance is where we went. In our elevation, we got down to about 2,000 feet, and we got up to over 13,000 feet. All of it's pretty much driving. We did very little walking on this trip, and you'll see why when you see who went on this trip. We were kind of one of the younger people on the trip. So within that 13 days, we saw 264 bird species, of which 119 were lifers for me, and 127 were what I call photo lifers. That's the first picture I've gotten of that bird. And it was arranged all through the tour companies. All that we had to do was get there. And even that they could help you with and make sure you timed it. So they handled all the guides, all the lodges, all the transportation, and you'll see how that plays out. And I'll cover some of the pictures of what it looks like on a trip like that. in any trip like this, you have to think, what do I really want to see that I probably will see, but I'll rejoice when I do see it. And our two species before we went were Andean cock of the rock, just because it is just a goofy bird. It is so flamboyant. You say, if I can see that, it would be worth the trip almost by itself. Mary had one that wasn't as showy, and I'll let Mary speak as to why she wanted to see a potu. Any potu, not necessarily a common, but
we ended up seeing two potu species. We saw a common potu and also a great potu. And I just think they're cute. They're related to like whippoorwills and nighthawks. So they're nocturnal and they have a really big mouth. So they catch moths and stuff at night. But during the daytime, they just sit on a dead stub like that and stick their nose up in the air and don't move. And if the guide didn't know where they usually roost, you would never, ever see one.
So this was beside the road, probably 50 yards off the road. All the guides know where this bird roosts. So they stop the bus, pull it off the road. Okay, there's a potu over there, and everybody goes, where? Look at that. You see that stick sticking up over there? The top of that is a potu. And then you get your binoculars on it, your cameras on it. You know, everybody is, you know, sliding their windows to take it out of the bus window just to make sure they get it. And then you pile off the bus, and everybody does that. And always when you stop the bus, it's interesting. Before you get back on, you usually find 2 or 3 other bird species that are in the same spot. So it's always hard, and it's good to have a good tour leader to get everybody back on the bus, to get them out of the road so that nobody gets hurt, and you get on your way to something else. So that was a typical potu experience of pulling off side of the road and seeing other things while you were there. So, but the cock of the rock they gather in leks at this time of the year. So when I think of a lek, I think of something like a grouse or a prairie chicken. You go out there and they're prancing along the ground, and that's what I had stuck in my head. So this experience was in the afternoon. We were hustling to get to the place before the birds got to the lek, because they came in the early afternoon. We pulled up to this farm that had been turned into a refuge because it has cock of the rocks there, and tourists were coming to see it. So everybody gets off the bus. A few people have to go to the restroom. There's birds all, on the lawn, and people are looking at them. And finally, they get everybody going down the pathway to the lek. And we're thinking, where is this lek? So we walk out through the field. There's a toucan in the distance. Everybody's stopping for the toucans. Like, okay, keep going, ignore the toucan. Ignore the toucan, keep marching. And you go up some hills, down some hills, around some hills. And you got to realize that there were at least one couple and one gentleman that were 80 years old or older. And so that's the pace, but we had to keep on going until you come to the side of the hill that had been carved out, and then somebody had put up some poles and put on some covering such that made the blind. It was, and then some benches were cut out of the hillside inside. It was probably from here to the exit sign, long, but about 3 feet wide. And you just basically walked around this hill until you could hear and see the cock of the rock. So expectations were high getting into this blind. And then we were sitting there a few minutes, and this is what we heard and saw. See the cock of the rock? No, neither did we. And it went on. It seemed like forever, where you could just hear them everywhere down below you in these trees. But I couldn't see them. Nobody could see them. And this is a photo tour with about half the people with tripods, and about a fourth of the people with 600 millimeter, f4 lenses. And so everybody's kind of jockeying around, carrying around, 80 years old, 70-year-old people with tripods and 10-pound cameras every time they moved. And then Mary was traveling with me. She was the birder. It's like she was getting shoved out of the way, pardon the photographers, trying to get a glimpse through the tree leaves at these. Thankfully, after, I don't know, it seemed like way too long, they came closer and closer, and so that you could get pictures like we saw on that last page there, through the leaves. So this is not something sitting 10 feet away. This was something through the leaves. There was a hole in, and you could get a picture of the cock and the rock. And so it behooved to have a good tour leader that was helpful in negotiating the good spots of like, did you get some good pictures? Can you let somebody else get in there? Or, hey, you're not being aggressive enough. You need to get in there and get some good pictures too. So it was very helpful to have a good photography and tour leader to do that. So that was our target birds. Then this is my first quiz. So what do the numbers 132, 52, and 49 mean? Any guesses? We'll start with 132 species of hummingbirds in Ecuador, of which we saw 52 on this trip during that time. And of those 52, I got pictures of 49 of them. So that I thought was a very successful trip for the hummingbirds. This one is a chestnut-breasted coronet. He was a very showy guy. At one of the lodges, there's a veranda outside the eating area. You walk out onto the veranda, and this particular hummingbird, like that particular stick that was about 10 feet away from the edge of the veranda, and he just loved to stretch multiple times a day. So I got a few good pictures and then went back later, and then somebody saw my pictures from, I don't know where they were from, Sweden or somewhere. And so they were taking pictures of that one hummingbird just because he was such a showman. Another place you don't necessarily expect hummingbirds is drinking out of the fountains. So this was our first stop at some place called Puembo Birding Gardens. It was our first lodge that we went to close to the Quito, Ecuador airport. And here's a couple of species of sparkling violet ear and western emerald that was drinking out of their fountain. Again, this fountain was in an enclosed garden area next to the lodge eating area, and there was a one-way glass where you could see them, they couldn't see you. Not necessarily the best for photography, you couldn't really take good pictures through the glass, but if you went around it, you could get some pictures. So that was our first stop, hummingbirds drinking out of the fountain. Here's the outside of the Puembo Birding Garden. It's in a gated community. Again, probably half hour, 45-minute drive through winding streets of residential and areas to get to it. So very good place to stop off to. Another good reason that's a good place to stop off is that the person that runs this lodge is also a tour operator within Ecuador and arranges tours. And so she helped our tour arrange for everything. So it was a very good person to get to know. I could go on and on about her, but I won't. In addition to lodges, as you drive between the lodges on this trip, you make stops. Everybody's got to eat lunch, right? So you go in, you get your food, you sit down outside at the tables, boom, 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 boom. 8 hummingbird feeders lined up, numbered 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And people calling out, oh, look, crownwood nymphal number 6, or whatever, you know. And so it's very hard to eat your lunch because it's so exciting to watch the different hummingbirds at lunch. So this is an example of a lunch hummingbird, crownwood nymph. White-necked Jacobin, kind of an example of just to show you that the males are different than the females. And in this case, this female is so speckledy underneath that I keep on getting it confused with the mini spotted hummingbird, which is a male, looks a fair amount like that underneath. Of course, it's altogether different in terms of bill shape and that sort of stuff, but it had me fooled more than once thinking I had seen a different kind of hummingbird. So just when you think you know all of them, the females show up and you start thinking, I don't know the hummingbirds anymore. Some of the hummingbirds have long bills. This sword-billed hummingbird has a bill that's 4 inches long, about as long as its body, maybe even a little longer, I'm not sure. This was at Guango Lodge, which is at 9,300 feet. So when you think about hummingbirds' tropical environment, this is at, think Colorado Rockies. I'll show you a picture of that lodge and what it looked like. But this is one of our target species at this lodge, was just, we wanted to see the sword-billed hummingbird there. Here's a picture of the inside of that lodge in our bedroom. I think of this as, it looks like an Alps ski chalet. If you walk into the room, it has the sloped ceiling. If you walk outside the doorway to this room, the hallway has the same sloped ceiling coming from the other way, and it's really, really narrow, dark woods. Just so happens the bedrooms in this are not heated. So you think, boy, this is going to be a cold night because it's in the 40s and it was rainy outside. But they solved that by, at the end of dinner, you got the nice little hot water bottle dressed up in a nice little sweater. You tucked that underneath your blankets and it just kept you warm all night long. So it was just a wonderful experience that I did not expect to be sleeping with a hot water bottle in Ecuador on this trip. But you never can tell what you're going to run into. Of course, the common areas that had wood stoves and the eating area had wood stoves, and it was very warm in the common areas. But when you went to bed, tuck in your hot water bottle. In fact, I got Mary a hot water bottle for Christmas that year after that. So with a cover. No, this was last year. In addition to the long-billed, you had longer tails. So these are sylphs, two different kinds of sylphs. The long-tailed is over here, and the violet-tailed, his tail went on down here. I just like this picture because of the flower up here. Got to look at my notes here. A butylon, is that how you pronounce it? A butylon, some type of a butylon. There was actually a flower piercer bird that had pierced a hole in the flower up here, and instead of drinking out this end of the flower, the sylph discovered that it was easier to drink as it dripped out from the top there. So that was cool. This one is, the violet-tailed. That was on the western Andes slope, and this was on the eastern. Similar species, but two different ones depending on what side of the Andes you're on. Also learned some photo tips along the way. This is a photography tour, and there was a professional photographer that was leading the tour. He's a professor at Montana State University, an ecology professor, also professional photographer, and leads photography tours. So he taught me some methods, and if there's any photographers in the group, something I had not thought of before is how do you show motion but yet freeze the motion at a certain point in time for hummingbird pictures. So better go to the right picture. So that's a picture of a collared Inca using that technique where you see the motion in the bird and in the wing, but yet one of the places is frozen at a certain spot so you can see the detail. Whereas in the way I normally take pictures of hummingbirds, either I freeze the whole wing and I get all of it frozen in place, or I get a blur. So this is a combination of both of them. So if anybody's from photography sort of thing, I can share with you the technique afterwards. The wood stars, I don't know how these things fly. If you think of bumblebees and how do bumblebees fly, these are the hummingbirds that are like, how can something with this little pot belly fly? But they're beautiful little birds, yay long, colorful. So again, I called them the bumblebee hummingbirds, but the wood stars. This guy I called a Muppet. Look at that picture up here. Isn't that like a sad Muppet face? At another one of the lodges, again, most of the balconies are outside of the feeding area, the dining area for the humans. And there was a flower bed that was below. And this hummingbird liked to feed there as well as sit there. And there was a nice opening that you could take your picture as you stood above it on the balcony, look down 10 feet down, and got a nice picture of the bird sitting down there peacefully. So again, just the colors of the flowers matching the hummingbirds made for very nice photography experiences. There's a picture of that balcony. Not only was it beautiful from just the flowers right underneath it, but take your morning coffee out onto the balcony, look through the valley, over to the other side of the valley and off in the distance, mountains. And I like to think that's a volcano, but it's not. It's probably just mist coming off there. But I thought that made an interesting picture because that was your typical morning. You get up and have breakfast, or if you get up before breakfast, there's always coffee available, and you go out and watch the activities from as soon as you want to get up. Here's one of my favorite birds. If you think about our ruby-throated hummingbird, has that nice iridescent throat. This is an iridescent everything hummingbird. Look at that tail. And it's just every feather is iridescent on this golden-tailed sapphire. And they're just the same. This is that same balcony as the Muppet hummingbird. That's the same balcony. Now you see what it looks like from the photographer's point of view. This is me down here. This is our tour leader, photography leader, and then here's some other participants here. Basically, here's the flowers where those last few pictures were taken from. There's that valley we were overlooking before, and right behind us here was where everybody ate. And you can kind of see you kind of picked your spots according to what feeder you wanted to watch out. There's another feeder over here on this side. There's another group of feeders over there, and often these trees over here, there were some. Well, we're up in there, parakeets once, and there were some macaws over here. There were some monkeys in here. There were toucans in there. So these trees here were also a subject of interest as well. So we'll see some of the picture of a toucan that was in there a little bit later in the presentation. You'll see a hawk arching a kite flying through here too. So you get a feel for the equipment. Probably about a fourth of the people had these, the prime lenses. And then 3/4 of the people had nice zoom lenses, 100 to 600 sort of zooms, and one or two had bridge cameras, so lighter weight sort of thing. So there was a variety of photographers on the trip. Here's a picture of that swallowtail kite. We get those occasionally in Illinois, but they go all the way down into Ecuador. This was that same valley, and they were flying this. I don't know how many there were, at least one flying overhead and into that valley. Here's the sleeping area of that same lodge. You step down, you step off you step off of the porch that we were watching all the birds from, go on these paths, and there was a series of rooms divided up there for each, basically, to sleep to. A bedroom over here was the bathroom, and then there was some area over here for storage and get all your gear, and I think there was a desk over on the side. So again, very nicely appointed, but very condensed. All you need to do is go in there and sleep, right? So that was very nice. So here's some more hummingbirds. This little guy was scratching his beak, the wire-crested thorntail. That was at that same location at the WildZ Lodge that we've been looking at a lot of the pictures from. Here's another case where we've got racket tails. Depending on which side of the Andes you're on, you got your white booted ones, and then you got your little buffy pantaloons. Mary like to call them pantaloons. So the pantaloons are on the eastern side of the Andes, and the white booted ones were on the west. There's another place that we stopped along the way. We didn't stay at this lodge, but it had hummingbird feeders. You step off the bus, you walk up this path. Hummingbird feeders lined the path as you climbed some stairs up to this overlook balcony. And then at the top, there was a railing over here with some feeders down there. I'll show you some pictures of what the feeders liked. And that's where tanagers and toucans and that sort of stuff hung out along with the hummingbirds. So again, this is our photography and overall tour leader right there. Here's a picture of two very engaged velvet purple coronets. They were fighting with each other, flying around, and eventually they grabbed a hold of each other's feet and flopped to the ground right in front of me on the path. As I was coming up from the restroom, trying to get back up there, these two things from me to you. And I, thankfully had on my shorter lens that I was able to focus on it. And I got I call it, this is the push me, pull you hummingbirds. So I thought that was kind of a cool thing, cool picture. There's 17 species in Ecuador of toucans, toucanettes, and arasaris. They all look, similar, long bills, heavy bills. This was outside of where we went to lunch one time. Outside the restaurant, they had a little feeding station along the sidewalk. They had a forest area. This plate-billed mountain toucan was right out here, sitting out there. And this yellow-throated toucan, that was in those trees that I had pointed out before on that one veranda at the WildZ Lodge. And he just would have the interesting poses. So as long as you sit out there, you can take pictures of one bird because they were doing so many different interesting things. I don't know how many pictures I took of that bird, a lot. So this one was hard to take a picture of because I had my big lens on and I couldn't fit the whole thing in, so I had to go get a different lens. Here's a picture of that plate-billed toucan that's with a cell phone, so you get a feel for what it would look like if you just looked out over that balcony. And this was probably 20 feet or so down to where they had these branches that were posted out there that they had mosses and epiphytes on. And they tucked bananas in there behind there so the pictures will look nice. So you don't see the bananas in, but they are feeding stations. So don't think these pictures were us walking through wild jungles and seeing these birds come to us. It's set up for photo tours and birding tours. One of the other things we went after were Antpittas, and of the 24 species of Antpittas, we saw 8 of them, and these are 3 of them. I'll tell you where the Maria comes in a little bit later. So the giant Antpitta, ochre-breasted, and chestnut-crowned Antpitta. Again, Antpittas were one of Mary's favorite. Maybe you can describe why you like Antpittas.
There's something really cute about an Antpitta because they have big eyes and big heads and long legs, and they're kind of like a papaya on legs. So I don't know. They're like a cartoon bird. I just think they're adorable.
So the Maria that I had listed on there comes from this guy right here. His name is Angel Paz. It's Spanish, so Mary, correct pronunciation there. Thank you. He is the person that learned that Antpittas will come to you if you call them and feed them. So he set up the first visitor tourist attraction of Antpittas, if you will, by feeding them chopped up worms. And this one on that last page was Maria. So we went to this place where there was a feeding station. It was Maria, Maria, vinga, vinga, Maria, come, come. You know, so that was, and each of the Antpittas places had different names. This one was Maria. I don't remember the other ones. But there are several articles, if you want to look up his name, that have written about what that meant to the economy of Ecuador and the ecotourism, just started by the work of this guy here. It's spread across the country into many different areas. So I won't go into the details, but that's the guy. So some of these places, here is the person that, well, I got you on this page. This is our bird guide that was on our bus and went with us the entire trip. So I mentioned we had a photography guide and tour leader that organized the trip. He was from Montana, and most of the people on the trip went because he was going. He had gone on previous trips with him. This is the guy that the native of Ecuador, expert in the Ecuadorian birds. And then when you went to specific locations, you would get someone like, this is the Antpitta whisperer for this location. And sometimes you would get a local bird guide that was just for that particular refuge and would know where to go in that refuge. So you would meet these people there. So that's another kind of a view of what the trip was like. Yeah, I got a picture at the end, what the group looked like. No, and the guide spoke English very well too. Yeah. Question was, does everybody speak English? So all the tour participants and the guides all spoke English. The only person that had limited English was the driver, and he was learning English because he wanted to be a guide too. So here's another picture of an Antpitta feeding area. We were up on the hill a little bit, overlooking this area, and this person is down here putting out the worms, and then he would come up and call, and the Antpittas would come into this area. You'd see them creeping into the trees out here, then going down to the feeding areas. So that's an example of what that looks like.
Maybe we should explain that Antpittas are ordinarily very secretive. You hear them a lot. Once you figure out what their different calls sound like, you're like, oh, I've been here and them out in the jungle. But they're very secretive, and you would be very lucky to see one at all, except that this guy has habituated the certain ones that have territories on his land. Like, he knows where their little territory is on his land. And if he goes in their territory and brings them worms at a certain time of day to a certain spot and then makes their call, they're like, oh, if we come to this spot, when he makes that call, we get big fat worms. Whoopee.
So this is the one where I talked about the grasses were as interesting as the birds in the kind of the, I think it's more the biological term is paramo. It's just where you see these grasses, the grasses and then the low vegetation here and the flowers. This is a flower that this hummingbird, the Ecuadorian hill star, here's the name, you can pronounce it for yourself. But anyway, that's what they feed on. So to find this hummingbird, you find this flower. And you find this flower at over 10,000 feet. So that's where you go for this. So that was, as we were crossing over the divide in the Andes, was a little side trip up in to see this one, as well as a couple of ones that I didn't get great pictures of that's where you find them. Here's another second of my quiz. Do you see anywhere on these heliconias back here a great-billed hermit or a buff-tailed sickle-billed hummingbird? Anybody see those? Anybody see them? It's a trick question. Neither did we. We went to see that. We stopped here to see those hummingbirds. It was drizzling rain. You know, you got people with camera gear trying to keep it dry. And it looks nice over here, but what you don't see is the 15 people standing right here trying to stay out of the rain. And it wasn't miserable, but it wasn't a fun experience. So it's not all that, you know, everything is queued up for you. They don't tie out the hummingbirds off so you can see them. This one in particular was, you know, feeding in a natural area. But the side benefit is, again, this person is seeing an economic way to prosper his family. So he was building this refuge around these, I forget which one it was. It was one or the other. I can't remember. That was something sought after. That was the draw. But if you don't see it, you're going to be disappointed. So he had built a platform, and we were kind of one of the first users of it. It was like, watch your step. That part of the platform isn't done yet. So, but it was covered, so we were able to see his other feeders with some other birds. And I'm going to give you a hint as to what those birds were by putting this coat on, because these are kind of typical coloration for this other group of birds. And we'll see if anybody can guess what they are. They aren't hummingbirds, but they might be wearing something this color or dashing red or bright orange. Anybody got any guesses as to what those birds are? Pete, you got a guess? Pete, anybody? Yes, tanagers. And the word tanager is kind of interesting. I am not a biologist or a taxonomist, so I'm not going to say, but of those 143 tanager species, not all of them are called tanagers from the common names. And these tanagers are different than our tanagers here. So if you're interested, have at it, do your own reading. But I'm showing a picture of some of the ones that we saw that were called tanagers. So this is a masked crimson tanager, the silver-throated tanager, the flame-faced tanager. These guys were everywhere and just gorgeous. Glistening green tanager and the white-lined tanager. This one is a female. The male is where it's kind of black with a silver throat, which is where the white line came in. But or actually a silver. You kind of see it on the bill here. It was more prominent on the male. But these were just awesome birds. You think of hummingbirds, you just gorgeous. But these were almost as gorgeous. This was where that sickle-billed hummingbird, the one slide we just saw. These were the constellation birds. So, or some of the constellation birds that we saw there. This was, remember I saw that RSRI that I said was too big to fit in my big camera lens. That was in the same feeding station as this one. Okay, here's another quiz. Where's the bird? This one, the bird is actually in the picture. You see the bird here? See these are the tail feathers. These tail feathers are over 2 feet long. And this is, again, one of those things that the guides in the area know where this bird roosts. It was on a road. They stopped the bus. Everybody got out of the bus. And it was from here to maybe the far end at the far height. It was probably 30 feet above us on a hillside over that direction. And you get off the bus and say, where is it? I don't see it. So until the guides put up their scopes and put the scope on them, then you saw it. Oh, wow. And then you could get a little closer and get some decent pictures. There was another you could climb up about 10 feet onto the side of the hill. There's a little scooped off place for 1 or 2 people to stand there while you take some pictures. But it just roosts there. Can you see where his face is? I mean, I have to get up here to see that this is his bill and that's his right eye. It's just, yeah, question.
Does this bird molt? I'm particularly interested in the 2 long tail feathers.
I have no idea, but you can look up wire-tailed nightjar and find that out. I would presume all birds molt, but I don't know how long it takes them to grow those feathers. They were just awesome, though. And it looks like it, has moss on the end of it. I don't know if it really is moss or is that green coloration on the feathers. You can tell me about the ferns. I don't remember anything about the ferns. Sorry, Mary.
This was on a road cut, like a steep bank where it had been cut through. And there were all these long dead ferns just hanging down. And his tail looked just like a long dead fern. Yeah, they're smart.
Now we're moving into flycatchers. Think about flycatchers around here. We'll occasionally get a western flycatcher. We've got kingbirds and that sort of stuff. They're flycatchers. I don't know how many flycatchers we saw. Oh, there we go. We saw 9 different species of flycatchers. Like this cute little cinnamon flycatcher. Cute, but deadly as far as moths were concerned. Here he is munching on a moth, and this is the moth dust over here from the wings of the moth. So again, that was from the balcony that had the first hummingbird we saw in the pictures. That was the same balcony, just had flycatchers feeding off the moths that were there. Another time, perhaps, we shall talk about the other species. As we wind down the bird section of this, we could talk about flower piercers, croaking ground doves, foliage gleaners, tree hunters, wood creepers, goans, puffbirds, jacamars, raptors of various flavors, barbettes, woodpeckers, caracaras, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. If you're interested, and I'll give Dennis a PDF of this, here's a web link to my eBird trip report, which has all the birds species we saw, as well as the pictures I attached in eBird. You can get them there. So if we had more time, we could do that. So that's that part. Now we're into, I was going to show you a few more pictures about the lodges. This is about 5 minutes worth. So this is the dining area that I was talking about, that surrounded by a veranda. Here's where that first hummingbird was, right out here. Here's that same lodge. This is San Isidro Lodge with the pathway going down to our lodge was down there. So you walk down your pathway, and this is where I lead into say the rooms were assigned rather ad hoc. Normally travel in pairs. If you have to pay a premium if you're traveling single. Mary and I had stayed in nice rooms. We enjoyed them quite a bit. But this time, we hit the jackpot. This was our room. It was a family room that the lodge had this one open. And so we had our own little veranda to ourselves with a hammock on it. What did you see outside there? I can't remember.
Golden-headed quetzal out there.
Golden-headed quetzal was outside our porch. And so some people came in and Mary was showing them the quetzal outside our window. There's a different lodge. Again, common that the cabins would be separate from the main lodge. So you'd hike down a little trail. This was a duplex, so ours was over here, and then we had another lady that was staying on the other side. Here's the hummingbird feeder station at this Sachamatia Lodge, and I'm going to show you a little video of the hummingbird situation and the challenge of identifying on the spot, and you'll get an appreciation for why I like to take a lot of pictures, because I identify most of the hummingbirds from the picture. Oh, yeah. It's just, they're just coming and going so fast that it's hard to keep them straight. So that's a typical hummingbird environment. Yeah, sugar water. It is sugar water. The question was, is it sugar water like we use? Yes, that's what it is. Here's another lodge with a nice view out the window at Bella Vista. This was down on the western slope, as we if you come out at Quito and went west down the slope. Now we're getting into what do the hummingbirds eat? Or what do the birds other than hummingbirds eat? They set out black lights, the mesh-covered baskets, and it attracts insects of various varieties. So if you're into insects, you can take some really cool insect pictures, like this longhorn beetle here of some sort. Moths litter the ground because they come into the black lights. And in the mornings, you go to a photo blind that overlooks a black light sheet that is full of moths. And then here's a chestnut-capped brushfinch down here just feeding off some of the moths on the ground. And this blind area would go around for probably another 100 feet, had railing and that sort of stuff, and you had wands and other things that would come in. But the main attraction was the moths to the lights. So that was the first stop in the morning, was checking out the blind and have a photo opportunity there. And again, here's one of the strong-billed woodcreeper feeding on that mesh bag that was hanging right beside the path in the main lodge area. So there's where you can see where the moths, if there weren't any birds there, you could zoom in and just spend as much time as you wanted to just figuring out what the moths were. Couldn't go on without saying the food was great. Local sorts of specialties, probably Americanized a little bit, but I didn't have a meal I didn't like. I'm not a picky eater, but it was all very good. Lots of soups of different varieties that were one of the specialties of Ecuador. Desserts were wonderful. How do you tell a good tour company? How do you know you got a good guide? One is they know their audience. They're traveling with 60 to 80 years old, stopping at restrooms every once in a while instead of having people beg for them was a sign that we got a good one. So anyway, here's our guide over here, our bird guide, and here's the driver over here. And here's a picture of the van that we went in, one of those 15-passenger high-top vans, which is comfortable to ride around in. Here's a picture of our group. Here's Mary, here's me, here's our tour guide, our tour leader, John Winnie, Jr., again from Montana. The dog was with the refuge. We did not bring the dog with us. So here's our bird guide. Here's the driver. This is the local guide at that refuge, and the rest are open. Here's another local guide at that refuge. The rest are participants in our thing. So you can kind of see, even though I blocked out their faces, you got a feel for 80-year-old, a couple of probably close to 80-year-olds, 60, whatever we are, 70s, etc. So it was Holbrook, so that's the next thing. So if you're interested in these sorts of birding tours, you would go online, look up Holbrook. They have a nice way they summarize their itinerary online. When you actually go on the tour itself, they give you a handout. Oops, I can get back to that. Here's the table of contents of that handout that would cover things about what to bring, etc. And then the actual tour leader, like John Winnie in this case, since he's a photographer, tells, here's what I'm bringing for taking photography. Here's what I would suggest you bring. Here's how to pack it. That was very helpful as well. I want to compare it briefly to a birding tour that we went on in southern Ecuador. What's the difference between this again was a modest paced birding tour. You can have a very fast paced birding tour, which you're at world experts and we're trying to see the maximum number. This was kind of modest. They, again, there's probably people in their 60s, 70s that were on there. But you see more birds, and you get 2 bird guides and no photography guide. So it's better for birding, see more birds. This was the photography expertise and being able to slow down and make sure everybody gets good photos. Versus over here, did everybody see the bird? Great, move on. But you weren't running between birds like the fast-paced ones that we wouldn't go on. So this was, the modest-paced birding tour. It was appropriate for the age group. There was one person, we took a 2-mile hike and she couldn't make it, but other than that, it was paced appropriately. This one was slower paced, much, much slower paced. Number of birds were more on the birding tour. Number of great bird pictures were on this one because they stopped at the lodges where the feeders were. Again, you're not out in the wild as much. We did take some walks out on lanes and at the lodges and took some of their walks out on the grounds. to see some birds, but you didn't get as good pictures. But you got more birds. So anyway, so that's my comparison there. I don't know if anybody cares about equipment, so I'll stop there and just say the eyes of Ecuador. It's hiding. He's tucking his head underneath here. The beak is down.
Oh, okay. That is eye?
Yeah, this is his eye. It's a strange picture. That's the Andean cock of the rock. I'll get back to the other picture while Pete's.
Yeah, I have a question about travel with the especially with a long lens. Yeah, I don't want to trust the airline to any of my optics, so I always carry
carry
them
it
on.
on. Yeah.
So is that how you do it, and how
Yeah,
many people
I took a
do it
500
with a longer-
millimeter. I took a 500 millimeter lens and a 100 to 400 and two bodies and a flash, and it fit in my case. That would fit in an overhead bin. That was one of the reasons that I have an American Airlines credit card, so I can board before the masses, so I can make sure I have overhead bin space, and I don't travel on regional airlines that don't have good overhead bins. We flew out of Indianapolis down to Miami on this one. I'm getting back to the cock of the rock here. There it is. His beak is hidden underneath here, underneath those feathers. Yeah.
Could you use flash a lot of times, or?
Some places you can't use flash.
Okay.
Most of the places you couldn't use flash, but at the lodges in the area that wasn't their specialty birds, like in the hummingbird feeding areas, you could use flash. And I use it as a fill flash. I don't like to use flash just to blind the birds, but if it's a drizzly day or I have to have a slower shutter speed, I use a flash to fill in.
On the shadow.
Yeah.
On the shadows. I actually had a trip to Ecuador booked, and then COVID happened. Then after, and late in COVID, it was said that Ecuador wasn't the safest place. So
Southern Ecuador wasn't.
okay, which kind of answers the question. So did you feel safe? What were some of the precautions you would recommend? How do you ensure more safety?
One was go with a reputable company that you trust, that they're watching those things closer than you are. And so
Okay.
Holbrook, I felt confident with them. The United States State Department travel advisories, keep watch on those. And those are what we watched. And around the southern Ecuador, there was caution, don't go to these, what would be the equivalent of our states. Don't go to these, but up around Quito, it said it was safe to travel. Mary, did you want to add something?
And you didn't get to.
I'll go into
the
what we ran
Galapagos?
into. Yeah, no, we did not go to the Galapagos.
We felt very safe both of our Ecuador trips. The first one was focused on southern Ecuador, and I think a big reason, we were with a tour group, and we had local guides that spoke the language and knew what the deal was. Like on this past trip, there was a kind of a police stop in one town where they were checking vehicles for stolen guns, basically. And our guide and our driver were like, they were very cool, and basically they just looked in the back of our van and let us go. So, it was no big deal. But I think the fact that you're out in the countryside and you're at these birding lodges, as opposed to being in the cities and bopping around in the cities, much safer just being out in the hinterlands.
So the only thing we ran into that was a little unusual is that while we were there, they have their national elections going on. The main opposition candidate was assassinated. And so we had to go back to Quito to fly out of there. That's when the security notched up. That's when the police checkpoint was that we were at. And again, the guides handled that. The local, the driver and the local to Ecuador guide was always on the bus with us. But I would not go by myself. I would not travel. I would not schedule a trip to Ecuador and try to drive myself and all that stuff. You can, but I wouldn't.
Just comment, I think you're really lucky to have seen the Potu. Did you see it on the first trip too?
No,
On this trip?
on this one.
And on the first trip to Ecuador, did you see one as well?
No.
Yeah.
The Potus, I think, are related to whippoorwills and nighthawks. They have a very wide mouth and very big eyes at night, but during the day, not so much.
I even wrapped one of Mary's presents up to look like Potu Christmas presents. Thank you, everyone, for coming. Hopefully you enjoyed it.
Well, on behalf of Peoria Audubon, we do appreciate your taking the time to share all of your photographs with us. Made for a nice evening. So thank you very much.